I wasn't looking for another woman. I wasn't looking for anyone. My last relationship had ended in a spectacular bonfire of lies and accusations, leaving me with nothing but a secondhand pickup truck, a commercial-grade lawnmower, and a profound distrust of the entire human species, particularly those of the female persuasion, who said things like, "It's not you, it's me. Right before you find out me is also your best friend." So, I started a landscaping business. It was simple, solitary work. Grass didn't lie, hedges didn't cheat, soil was honest. I could spend 10 hours under the blistering sun, my muscles screaming and my hands caked with dirt, and feel more at peace than I ever had sharing a bottle of wine and whispering secrets under a threadbare quilt. My world had shrunk to the size of a well-manicured lawn, and that was exactly how I liked it. My newest client was a name on an invoice, E. Thorne. The property was intimidating. A severe modernist structure of glass and dark wood, set back from the road, surrounded by a lawn so perfect it looked like a CGI rendering. The kind of place where you felt you should take your boots off before stepping on the grass. I'd been hired by a property manager, had never met the owner, and preferred it that way. For 3 weeks, I'd arrived at 8 a.m. sharp every Tuesday, cut the grass in precise, satisfying lines, edged the walkways with surgical neatness, and left without seeing a soul. It was a perfect, sterile arrangement, until the fourth Tuesday. The sun was already beating down, turning the air thick and soupy. I had my headphones in, the roar of a podcast about ancient civilizations blocking out the whine of the mower. I was in the zone, focused on the clean line where the cut grass met the uncut, a small, controllable victory in a life that had felt anything but. I made the turn at the far end of the lawn, near the expansive glass wall that I assumed was a living room. And that's when I saw her. The sliding door was open a few inches, and a figure stood in the gap, cloaked in shadow. I shut off the mower, the sudden silence deafening. The podcast hosts were mid-sentence about Sumerian pottery. I pulled the headphones down around my neck, my heart thumping a nervous rhythm against my ribs. She stepped out onto the stone patio, and the morning light caught her. She was a black woman, tall and statuesque, wrapped in a silk robe the color of a stormy sea. Her hair was a cloud of intricate braids piled high on her head, and her face, even from 50 feet away, was all sharp, intelligent angles. She held a ceramic mug in one hand, steam ghosting from its rim. She didn't seem to have noticed me yet. She just stood there, breathing in the morning air, her posture a mixture of regal authority and a deep, private weariness. I felt like an intruder, a voyeur who had stumbled upon a secret moment of vulnerability. My job was to be invisible, a ghost who made the grass shorter. This woman, in her robe, with the quiet contemplation on her face, was entirely too visible. She turned her head, her eyes scanning the lawn, and they landed on me. They were dark, expressive eyes, and they held no surprise, only a calm, assessing intelligence. She gave a slow, deliberate nod, a gesture of acknowledgement that felt less like a greeting and more like a queen noticing a guard at his post. I nodded back, my hand feeling clumsy and greasy on the mower handle. Then she retreated back into the cool darkness of her house, the glass door sliding shut with a barely audible sigh. The show was over, but I couldn't shake the image of her, the storm-colored robe, the rising steam, the look of a woman who commanded the world, but was for a fleeting moment utterly alone in it. I restarted the mower, the engine's roar feeling louder now, a clumsy intrusion on the quiet dignity of the morning. The perfect sterile arrangement was broken. A person now lived in the house. A woman. And damn it all, I wasn't supposed to be looking. The following week, I arrived with a knot of anxiety in my stomach. I told myself it was ridiculous. She was a client. I was a contractor. The interaction had been minimal, a blip. But my hands felt clammy as I unloaded the mower. I scanned the windows of the house, looking for any sign of movement, and felt a hot flush of shame. I was acting like a teenager with a crush, not a 30-year-old business owner who had sworn off romantic entanglements. I forced myself to focus, yanking the starter cord with more aggression than necessary. The engine sputtered to life, and I pushed the machine forward, losing myself in the rhythm of the work. For an hour, it was just me, the grass, and the sun. It was working. I was calming down. Then, the back door slid open again. This time, she was dressed for work. A cream-colored pantsuit, tailored so perfectly, it looked like it had been sculpted to her body. Her hair was styled differently, pulled back in a sleek low bun that emphasized the elegant line of her neck. She was on the phone, her voice a low, authoritative murmur that carried across the lawn. I couldn't hear the words, but the tone was unmistakable. Sharp, decisive, a voice that didn't brook argument. She paced the length of the patio, one hand gesturing sharply as she spoke. This was E. Thorne, the executive, the woman who paid my invoices on time, whose name was probably on a letterhead somewhere, preceded by a very impressive title. This version of her was even more intimidating than the one in the robe. This was the armor. The robe had been the woman underneath. I kept my head down, pretending to be absorbed in a particularly stubborn patch of clover. I did not want to be noticed. I did not want another nod. But the phone call ended, and the silence stretched. I could feel her eyes on me. It was a tangible pressure on the back of my neck. Finally, I had no choice but to turn and face her. I killed the engine. The world rushed. Back in, the chirping of a nearby sparrow, the distant hum of traffic. "Good morning," she said. Her voice was smoother, less sharp than it had been on the phone. It was like honey, rich and deep. "Morning," I managed, wiping a sweaty hand on my jeans. She walked to the edge of the patio, her expensive-looking heels clicking softly on the stone. She stopped just a few feet away, close enough that I could smell her perfume. It was subtle, something woody and green, like a forest after rain. It was devastating. "You do excellent work," she said, her gaze sweeping over the lawn. It wasn't a compliment. It was a statement of fact, delivered with the same precision she'd used on the phone. "Thanks. I try to be thorough." My own voice sounded rough and clumsy in comparison. "I'm Evelyn Thorne," she said, extending a hand. Her nails were immaculate, painted a deep glossy burgundy. I looked down at my own hand, stained with grass and oil, a fresh blister forming on my palm. "Maya," I said, reluctantly taking her hand. Her grip was firm, her skin impossibly soft against my calloused palm. The contact sent a jolt up my arm, a spark of electricity I hadn't felt in years. I pulled away a little too quickly. "Maya," she repeated, tasting the name. "The property manager said you were reliable." He was not mistaken. She looked past me towards the back of the property, where a collection of overgrown flower beds choked with weeds were slowly strangling a few sad-looking rose bushes. "My schedule is demanding. I've neglected the gardens." I followed her gaze. "They need some work," I said, the understatement of the century. "I'd like to hire you for more than just the lawn," she said, turning her attention back to me. Her eyes were a very dark brown, almost black, and they seemed to see right through the layer of professional detachment I was trying so hard to maintain. "I want you to bring them back, whatever it takes, new soil, new plants. I want it to be beautiful again." My mind raced. This was a big job, a lucrative one. It was exactly the kind of project my fledgling business needed. But it also meant more time here, more time under her watchful eye, more chances for accidental handshakes and the scent of her perfume to short-circuit my brain. It meant proximity, and proximity was dangerous. Pride told me to say no, to protect the fragile peace I'd built for myself. Fear agreed wholeheartedly. But my bank account, and a deeper, more treacherous part of me, had other ideas. The part of me that was curious about the woman underneath the armor. The part that wondered what it would be like to make something beautiful for her. Okay, I heard myself say. I can do that. I'll draw up a proposal and a quote. Good, she said, a small, almost imperceptible smile touching her lips. It transformed her face, softening the severe lines. Send it directly to me. She turned and walked back into the house, leaving me standing in the sudden, overwhelming silence. I was no longer just the lawn girl. I was the gardener, and I was in so much trouble. The first week of the garden project was a lesson in controlled chaos. I spent most of it on my knees, wrestling with years of neglect. I tore out stubborn, thorny weeds that seemed to fight back, my arms covered in scratches. I dug up compacted clay-like soil, my shoulders aching with the effort of breaking it apart. It was brutal, physical work, and I welcomed it. It kept my mind occupied, preventing it from drifting towards the tall glass house and the woman inside it. Evelyn Thorne kept her distance. I would see her car, a sleek black sedan that probably cost more than my house, pulling out of the garage early in the morning and returning late at night. We operated in different orbits, on different schedules. I was a creature of the sun and dirt. She was one of fluorescent office lights in boardroom meetings. This separation was a relief. It allowed me to believe I could maintain the professional boundary I so desperately needed. I was just another service provider, like the person who cleaned her pool or delivered her groceries. But I was also an observer. Working in her space, I began to piece together a mosaic of her life. Through the large windows, I saw flashes of her existence. I saw her at a massive dining table, alone, a laptop glowing in front of her as she ate. I saw her on the phone, pacing, her silhouette a steady and restless energy. One evening, as I was packing up my tools, I saw her standing in front of a large abstract painting, her head tilted, a glass of red wine in her hand. She looked lost in thought, her professional armor shed, replaced by that same quiet, contemplative air I'd seen that first morning. These glimpses felt stolen, intimate. They made her less of an intimidating client and more of a person. A lonely person, my traitorous heart suggested. I sent her the proposal via email, a detailed plan outlining the soil amendments, plant choices, and a budget broken down to the last bag of mulch. I expected a formal one-line reply. Instead, she responded within the hour. This looks comprehensive, Maya. I have a few questions. Are you free to discuss it tomorrow evening around 7? My stomach did a nervous flip. A meeting, a real conversation. It was unavoidable. 7 works, I typed back, my fingers feeling clumsy on the keyboard. The next evening, I scrubbed the dirt from under my nails until my skin was raw. I changed out of my work clothes into the cleanest pair of jeans I owned and a simple black t-shirt. It felt ridiculously inadequate, like preparing for a diplomatic summit in pajamas. At precisely 7 o'clock, I knocked on the back door. She opened it immediately, as if she'd been waiting. She was wearing simple black lounge pants and a soft gray sweater. No armor. Her hair was down, a cascade of beautiful braids falling over her shoulders. The sight of her, so casual and relaxed, was somehow more disarming than her power suits. "Come in," she said, her voice warm. Her house was just as I'd imagined, minimalist, elegant, and immaculate. The air inside was cool and smelled faintly of that same woody green scent. It was her, the scent of her home. She led me to the kitchen, a cavernous space of stainless steel and white marble. My proposal was printed out on the island, next to 2 glasses and a bottle of white wine. "Wine?" she offered. "Water is fine, thanks." I needed to keep my head clear. She poured me a glass of water without comment, and then a glass of wine for herself. "I was impressed with the level of detail," she began, tapping a finger on the papers, "especially your plant choices, the lavender, the Russian sage. You understood the need for drought-tolerant species. Your property gets a lot of direct sun, I explained, finding my footing in the familiar territory of work. Anything too delicate would just bake. And the climbing rose for the back wall? She looked up from the proposal, her dark eyes meeting mine over the rim of her glass. What made you choose that one? It's a new dawn, I said, my voice steadier now. It's resilient, hardy. It can survive a lot, and it blooms all season. I just thought it seemed to fit. I didn't say what I was really thinking, that the garden needed something tough but beautiful, something that would keep coming back no matter how harsh the conditions, something that mirrored the woman I was beginning to see, a flicker of something, surprise, understanding, passed through her eyes. Resilient, she repeated softly. I like that. She was quiet for a moment, studying me. It was an intense, unnerving gaze. I felt like a plant specimen being examined under a microscope. Tell me, Maya, why landscaping? The question caught me off guard. It was personal, a step outside the bounds of our client-contractor relationship. I like working with my hands, I said, giving her the simple, safe answer. I like making things grow. So do I, she said, a wry smile playing on her lips. Though the things I grow are usually profit margins and market share. The humor was dry, self-aware. It was the first time I'd seen this side of her. I think the dirt is probably more forgiving, I countered, a bit of my own dry wit slipping out before I could stop it. Her smile widened, reaching her eyes this time. I have no doubt about that. She picked up a pen and signed the proposal at the bottom. Let's do it. Let's make it resilient. I left her house that night with a signed contract and a deeply unsettled feeling. The professional line had been blurred. We had shared a moment of genuine connection, a brief exchange of humor that felt more intimate than any conversation I'd had in months. She had seen a glimpse of me, and I had seen a glimpse of her. The garden wasn't just a project anymore, it was a collaboration. And that forced proximity was about to become a whole lot more complicated. The real work began. Days fell into a rhythm. I'd arrive early, the dew still clinging to the grass, and start the heavy lifting, amending the soil, digging trenches for irrigation, laying down stone for a small pathway she'd approved. Evelyn was usually gone by the time I started, but the evidence of her morning was always there. A single light left on in the kitchen, the faint scent of coffee in the air. Our interactions were brief but consistent. Sometimes she'd come out in the late afternoon, dressed in her work attire, and watch me for a few minutes from the patio. She never offered advice or criticism, just observed with that quiet, intense focus of hers. "How is the soil?" she asked one afternoon, her arms crossed over her chest. "Stubborn," I said, leaning on my shovel, sweat dripping down my temples. "But it's getting there. It just needs time and a lot of compost." "A familiar story," she murmured, more to herself than to me. She'd then nod and go back inside. These small exchanges were like breadcrumbs, tiny morsels of connection that I found myself anticipating. I started learning her schedule. I knew that on Thursdays, she worked from home. On those days, the tension was palpable. I was acutely aware of her presence inside the house, just a pane of glass away. I felt her eyes on me as I worked, even when I couldn't see her. I found myself working harder, my movements more precise, as if I were performing for an audience of one. One Thursday, the heat was particularly oppressive. The air was thick and still, the sun a merciless weight on my shoulders. I was drenched in sweat, my t-shirt clinging to my back. I'd forgotten to bring enough water, and by midday, I was starting to feel dizzy. I sat down on the low stone wall I was building, my head in my hands, trying to will away the black spots dancing in my vision. The back door slid open. "Maya!" Evelyn's voice was sharp with concern. I looked up. She was standing on the patio, holding a tall, condensation-beaded glass. "You look like you're about to pass out," she said, her brow furrowed. "Come inside for a minute." "I'm fine," I lied, my pride stinging. "Just taking a break." "Don't be ridiculous," she said, her tone leaving no room for argument. "Get in here, now." Defeated, I followed her into the blessedly cool house. The blast of air conditioning was a physical shock. She led me to the kitchen island and pushed the glass of ice water into my hand. "Drink all of it," she commanded. I obeyed, gulping down the cold water so fast it made my teeth ache. She watched me, her expression unreadable. When I finished, she took the glass and refilled it. "Thank you," I said, my voice hoarse. I should have brought more water. "You should have," she agreed, but there was no judgment in her tone. She leaned against the counter opposite me, studying my face. "You push yourself too hard." "It's the only way I know how to work," I admitted. "There's a difference between working hard and working yourself into heat stroke," she countered gently. "You're allowed to take a break, even when you're on the clock." Her concern felt nice. It was a strange, unfamiliar sensation. My ex, Sarah, had always seen my work ethic as a flaw, a distraction from our relationship. She'd called me obsessive. Evelyn seemed to see it as a part of who I was, something to be managed, not criticized. "I have a meeting in 5 minutes," she said, glancing at a sleek watch on her wrist. "But stay here as long as you need to cool down. There's more water in the fridge." She turned to leave, but hesitated. She looked at me, then at my arms, which were covered in dirt and a network of fresh red scratches from a rogue rosebush. Before I could process what was happening, she walked over to a drawer, pulled out a first aid kit, and placed it on the counter next to me. "For those," she said, nodding at my arms, "there's antiseptic spray and bandages." And then she was gone, her footsteps echoing softly as she walked down the hall. I sat alone in her silent, cool kitchen, a glass of water in one hand and a first aid kit by the other. It was the first time anyone had tried to take care of me in a very long time. It was a simple, practical gesture, but it cracked something open inside me. A small, tentative shoot of vulnerability, pushing its way through my own stubborn, compacted soil. I sprayed the antiseptic on my cuts, the sting a sharp, clarifying pain. And for the first time, I allowed myself to wonder what it would be like to let someone in. Just a little. That small act of kindness, the water, the first aid kit, shifted the dynamic between us. The carefully constructed wall of professionalism I'd built began to crumble, brick by brick. I started to see Evelyn not just as my client, but as a person who noticed things. She noticed when I was pushing myself too hard. She noticed the scratches on my arms. And I, in turn, started noticing more about her. I noticed the way she'd sometimes stand by the window in her home office, not looking at her computer, but out at the garden, at the progress I was making. I noticed the faint tension in her shoulders when she came home late, and how it seemed to ease a little when she saw the new lavender bushes I'd planted. We started talking more, not just about the garden, but about other things. She asked about my truck, a '98 Ford Ranger I was constantly tinkering with. I was surprised to learn she knew a surprising amount about engines, a holdover from working at her father's garage as a teenager. "He was convinced it would build character," she told me one evening, a nostalgic smile on her face. "Mostly, it just left me with permanently greasy hands and a deep appreciation for fuel injection systems." This revelation, so at odds with her polished, corporate image, charmed me completely. In return, I found myself telling her things I hadn't told anyone. I told her about growing up in the foster care system, about how gardening had been my escape, the one thing that was truly mine. My last foster mom had this tiny patch of dirt behind her building. I explained, sitting on the edge of the new stone wall as the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. She let me plant whatever I wanted. I grew tomatoes that were mostly green and crooked carrots, but they were mine. I made them happen. Evelyn listened, her full attention on me. She didn't offer pity or platitudes. She just nodded, a deep understanding in her eyes. "So, you've always been good at making things grow," she said softly. It was in these quiet moments, surrounded by the garden we were building together, that the trust between us deepened. It felt safe to be vulnerable with her. She had a stillness about her, a grounded quality that made me feel seen. She wasn't just looking at me, she was listening. One afternoon, a sudden summer thunderstorm rolled in. The sky turned a bruised purple, and the wind began to whip through the trees. I was trying to cover a pallet of new perennials with a tarp when the first fat drops of rain began to fall. "Maya!" Evelyn called from the patio door, which she was holding open against the wind. "Get inside! You'll be soaked!" I hesitated, wanting to secure the plants. "They're plants! They like water!" she yelled over the rising wind. "You, on the other hand, are not waterproof. Get in here." I laughed, giving up the fight and jogging towards the house as the heavens opened up. I was drenched by the time I stepped inside, my hair plastered to my head and water dripping from my clothes onto her pristine floor. "Sorry about the floor," I said, shivering slightly. "It's just a floor," she said, handing me a thick, fluffy towel. "Go get changed. You can put your clothes in the dryer. I'll find you something to wear." Before I could protest, she was guiding me towards a guest bathroom and then disappearing. The idea of wearing her clothes sent a dizzying, terrifying thrill through me. I took a quick, hot shower, washing away the rain and the day's grime. When I emerged, wrapped in a towel, a set of clothes was neatly folded on the counter. A pair of soft gray sweatpants and a black t-shirt that was ridiculously soft to the touch. I pulled them on. The pants were a little long, and the t-shirt hung loosely on my frame, but they were warm and dry. And they smelled like her. That woody green scent, now infused into the fabric. It felt like an embrace. I found her in the living room, a fire crackling in the minimalist fireplace. The storm raged outside, rain lashing against the glass walls, but inside it was warm and safe. She handed me a mug of tea. "My emergency storm watching kit," she said, gesturing with her own mug. "Tea and a fire." We sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the lightning fork across the sky. "Thank you," I said finally, "for this, for everything." "It's nothing," she said, her eyes on the flames. I don't have guests over very often." The admission hung in the air between us, a fragile, honest confession. "Me neither," I said quietly. "My life is very structured," she continued, as if speaking the thought aloud for the first time. "Board meetings, quarterly reports, international calls at 3 a.m. It's all very planned. There's not much room for this." She gestured vaguely at the fire, the storm, the unplanned intimacy of the moment. "Sometimes the unplanned things are the best," I said. She turned to look at me then, her gaze soft in the firelight. "I'm beginning to think you're right." We sat there for hours, talking as the storm blew itself out. She told me about the immense pressure she was under at her firm, the subtle and not so subtle racism and sexism she faced as a Black woman in a position of power. She spoke of the loneliness that came with it, the feeling of being on a pedestal, admired, but untouchable. It was a staggering display of vulnerability, a gift of trust she was handing me. In that moment, she wasn't E. Thorne, the powerful executive. She was just Evelyn, a woman who felt as isolated as I did. The storm outside had passed, but a different kind of electricity was now crackling in the quiet room between us. The storm changed everything. The line between client and contractor, already blurred, was now all but erased. The next morning, when I came to work, the air felt different, charged with unspoken possibility. When Evelyn came out to the garden with her morning coffee, her smile was warmer, her eyes lingering on mine for a fraction of a second longer than was strictly necessary. We didn't talk about what had happened, about the hours we'd spent sharing secrets by the fire. We didn't need to. It was a new understanding that lived in the space between us. I found myself thinking about her constantly. I'd be picking out plants at the nursery and wonder if she'd like the deep purple of a salvia. I'd be driving home, exhausted and covered in dirt, and find myself replaying our conversations, smiling at the memory of her dry wit. This wasn't just a crush anymore. It was something deeper, more terrifying, and infinitely more hopeful. The attraction was a physical thing now, a low hum of awareness whenever she was near. The turning point came on a sweltering afternoon a week later. I was planting the New Dawn climbing rose against the back wall of the house, the one I had told her was resilient. It was the centerpiece of the garden, the final, most important piece. I was on a small stepladder, carefully tying one of the thorny canes to the trellis I'd installed. "It's looking beautiful," Evelyn's voice came from directly behind me. I startled, nearly losing my balance. I hadn't heard her approach. She reached out instinctively, her hands landing on my waist to steady me. Her touch was electric. It shot through my thin t-shirt, a searing heat that made my breath catch in my throat. I froze, my hands still on the trellis, every nerve ending in my body screamingly aware of her fingers pressed against my skin. "Sorry," she said, her voice a low murmur near my ear. She didn't let go. "I didn't mean to scare you." "It's okay," I whispered, my heart hammering against my ribs. I could feel the warmth of her body behind me, smell her perfume. It was intoxicating. For a long moment, neither of us moved. The world seemed to shrink to the space we occupied, the sun beating down, the buzz of a nearby bee, the feeling of her hands on my waist. It was a moment stretched taut with unspoken words. With a chemistry so potent, it felt like it could set the very air on fire. Slowly, reluctantly, she dropped her hands. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. I turned around on the ladder to face her. She was standing so close I could see the flecks of gold in her dark brown eyes. Her expression was one of dawning realization, as if she were seeing me, seeing us for the first time. The professional mask was gone. The friendly client was gone. In her place was a woman looking at another woman with an unmistakable, undisguised desire. It was mirrored, I knew, in my own eyes. "The rose?" I said, my voice barely audible, needing to say something, anything to break the spell. "It needs to be tied securely or the wind will damage it." "Yes," she said, her gaze not leaving mine. "It needs a strong anchor." Her words were about the rose, but they were also about something else entirely. We both knew it. This was it, the turn, the moment when everything shifts and there's no going back. The attraction was no longer a secret, a private internal monologue. It was a living, breathing thing in the air between us, acknowledged in a silent, heart-stopping instant. She finally took a small step back, breaking the proximity but not the connection. The space between us now felt vast and empty. She cleared her throat, a flicker of her usual composure returning. "I'll let you get back to it," she said, her voice a little unsteady. She turned and walked back to the house without another word. I watched her go, my hand pressed to my waist where her fingers had been, the phantom heat of her touch still burning. I was anchored all right, anchored to her. And the thought was the most terrifying and exhilarating thing I had ever felt. From that moment on, the garden became a landscape of unbearable tension. Every interaction, no matter how mundane, was fraught with the memory of her touch and the knowledge of what we'd both seen in each other's eyes. The air between us was thick with it. When she brought me a glass of lemonade, our fingers would brush, and we would both pull back as if burned. When I tried to explain the new irrigation system, I would find myself losing my train of thought, mesmerized by the way the sunlight caught in her hair. My internal monologue was a constant looping reel of her voice, the scent of her perfume, the way her lips curved when she was amused, the memory of her hands on my waist. I was consumed. The solitude I had once cherished now felt like a painful void. The work, which had been my sanctuary, was now just a way to be near her, a slow torture of proximity without contact. My carefully constructed walls were gone, and I was left exposed, vulnerable, and aching with a need so intense it frightened me. I hadn't felt this way since, well, ever. My relationship with Sarah had been passionate but volatile, built on a foundation of insecurity. This felt different. It was quiet, solid, and terrifyingly real. One afternoon, my phone rang, buzzing in my pocket. I wiped my hands on my jeans and pulled it out, my heart sinking when I saw the caller ID. My sister, Chloe. "Hey," I answered, trying to sound normal. "Maya, you're alive," she said, her voice dripping with her usual brand of loving sarcasm. "I was about to file a missing persons report. You haven't answered my last 3 texts." "Sorry, I've been busy," I said, my eyes drifting towards the house. I could see Evelyn's silhouette in her office window. "Busy with what? Mowing grass?" "Maya, this is getting ridiculous. It's been almost a year since the Sarah apocalypse. You can't just hide in the dirt forever. We're all going out on Friday to that new queer bar, the Velvet Anchor. You are coming. It's not a request." My stomach twisted. The thought of being in a crowded bar, surrounded by people, felt suffocating. The thought of being around other women, women who were not Evelyn, felt like a betrayal of something that wasn't even real yet. "I don't know, Chloe. I have to work early Saturday." "Lame excuse," she shot back. "Listen, I get it. She did a number on you, but you can't let her win. You can't let her turn you into some landscaping hermit who's afraid to even look at another woman. You deserve to be happy, May. You deserve someone who won't tear you down." Her words were meant to be kind, a sisterly push in the right direction. But they hit a raw nerve. Afraid to look at another woman? Oh, I was looking. I was staring. I was drowning in the sight of one particular woman. I was terrified not because of Sarah, but because of Evelyn. Because this time it felt like the stakes were infinitely higher. "I have to go," I said abruptly. "My break's over." "Maya, wait." I hung up, my hand shaking. I looked up at the window again. Evelyn was gone. The external world, with all its expectations and painful history, had just crashed into the fragile bubble I'd been living in. Chloe was right about one thing. I couldn't hide forever. I had to do something. But what? March up to her door and say, "Hi, I'm your gardener, and I think I'm falling." In love with you? The power imbalance was a chasm between us. She was my employer. I was the person she paid to dig in her yard. The risk of misreading everything, of making a fool of myself and losing the best job I'd ever had, was immense. But the risk of doing nothing, of letting the silent, charged connection wither on the vine, felt even worse. The garden was almost finished. My time here was running out. I had to take a chance. The final day of the project arrived with a sense of both dread and anticipation. The garden was transformed. Where there had once been weeds and compacted earth, there were now thriving beds of lavender, sage, and black-eyed Susans. The resilient new dawn rose had already produced its first pale pink, fragrant blossoms. It was the best work I had ever done. It was our work. I spent the morning doing the final cleanup, raking stray leaves, wiping down the stone path, coiling my hoses. Every task felt heavy with significance. This was the last time I would have a reason to be here, in her space. When I finished, I packed all my tools into the truck, leaving only the invoice on the front seat. There was nothing left to do but say goodbye. I took a deep breath and walked to the back door, my heart pounding a frantic, unsteady rhythm. I knocked. Evelyn opened it. She was wearing a simple, elegant black dress. For a moment, I thought she was going out, that I had missed my chance. "It's finished," I said, my voice sounding strained. "I know," she said softly. "I've been watching. It's perfect." She stepped aside. "Come in, please." I followed her inside. She didn't lead me to the kitchen, but to the living room. The large glass wall that had once felt like a barrier now perfectly framed the garden, our garden, turning it into a living piece of art. She had a bottle of champagne and 2 flutes on the coffee table. "A celebration?" she said, answering my unasked question. She picked up the bottle, her hands deft as she untwisted the wire cage. "You don't have to do that," I said, feeling awkward and out of place. I was still in my dusty work clothes. "Yes," she said, her eyes meeting mine with a startling intensity. "I do." The cork popped with a soft hiss. She poured the champagne, the bubbles fizzing in the silent room. She handed me a flute. Our fingers brushed, and this time neither of us pulled away. The contact was a brand, a promise. "To the resilient garden," she said, raising her glass, "and to the woman who built it." "To the garden," I echoed, my voice thick. We drank. The champagne was crisp and cold, but it did nothing to cool the fire in my veins. We stood there, inches apart, the silence stretching, filled with everything we hadn't said for weeks. I had to say it. I couldn't leave without her knowing. "Evelyn," I began, my voice trembling slightly. "Maya," she said at the same time, her voice just as unsteady. She put her glass down on the table. She took a step, closer. "The garden isn't the only thing that's been transformed this summer." And that was it. That was all the permission I needed. I closed the remaining distance between us and kissed her. It was not a tentative, questioning kiss. It was a kiss born of weeks of longing, of stolen glances and unspoken desires. It was a kiss that said everything. Her lips were soft, and she tasted of champagne and of herself. For a heart-stopping second, she was still, and a wave of pure terror washed over me. I had misread everything. I had made a catastrophic mistake. Then she kissed me back. Her hand came up to cup the back of my neck, her fingers tangling in my messy ponytail, pulling me closer. The flute slipped from my other hand, falling to the thick rug with a soft thud. The kiss deepened, becoming hungry, desperate. It was a release of all the tension, all the yearning that had been simmering between us under the hot summer sun. It was the breaking of a dam, a cascade of feeling that left me breathless and dizzy. When we finally broke apart, we were both breathing heavily, our foreheads resting against each other. "I was so afraid," she whispered, her breath warm against my lips. "Me too," I confessed, my voice ragged. She pulled back just enough to look at me, her dark eyes searching mine. "I haven't felt this way, ever." "Good," I managed to say, a shaky smile on my face. "Because if you'd said you felt this way all the time, I'd have been really intimidated." A low, throaty laugh escaped her, a beautiful, genuine sound. "God, Maya." She shook her head, her expression a mixture of relief and wonder. She traced a finger along my jawline, her touch gentle, reverent. "What are we going to do?" The question hung in the air, real and practical. I was still her employee. The power dynamic was still there, a ghost in the room. "First," I said, my voice gaining strength, "you're going to pay my final invoice." She looked surprised. "What?" "Pay me," I repeated, a serious set to my jaw. So that this is over. So that I am no longer working for you. So that we can start on level ground. A slow smile spread across her face, one of deep respect and admiration. Okay, she said. Okay, Gardner. She walked over to her desk, wrote a check, and handed it to me. Our professional relationship was officially over. Now what? She asked, her eyes sparkling. Now, I said, taking the check and setting it aside, my gaze never leaving hers. You can ask me on a date. She laughed again, a sound of pure joy. Maya, she said, taking my hand and lacing her fingers through mine. Will you go on a date with me? Yes, I said, my heart feeling so full I thought it might burst. Yes, I will. The morning after felt like waking up in a different world. I woke up in Evelyn's bed, tangled in sheets that felt like silk and smelled like her. Sunlight streamed through the massive windows, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. For a moment, I was disoriented. Then it all came rushing back. The kiss, the confession, the hours of talking and touching that had followed. A conversation that was both verbal and physical, as we mapped the new, astonishing landscape of us. Evelyn was already awake, propped up on an elbow watching me. The intense, assessing gaze I had once found so intimidating was now filled with a tenderness that made my breath catch. Good morning, she murmured, her voice husky. Morning, I replied, a slow, shy smile spreading across my face. It felt strange and wonderful to see her like this, without her armor, without the weight of the world on her shoulders. Her braids were slightly tousled, and her face was soft with sleep. She was beautiful. I was worried you'd be gone, she confessed, her thumb stroking the back of my hand. That I'd dreamed it all. Nope, still here, I said, my voice still thick with sleep. Though I'm going to need some coffee before I can prove I'm not a figment of your imagination. She laughed, the sound warm and intimate in the quiet room. I can arrange that. As she moved to get out of bed, I caught her hand. Evelyn, wait. She paused, her expression turning serious. What is it? We need to talk about this, I said, gesturing between us. For real, about the whole, you're a high-powered executive and I'm the person who was, until yesterday, digging in your dirt. She sat back down on the edge of the bed, her full attention on me. Okay, let's talk. I've never been in a situation like this, I admitted, the words feeling clumsy. There's a difference between our lives, our worlds, a big one. And I don't want to be, I don't know, a project, a novelty, the rustic gardener you slum it with. The insecurity I'd been holding at bay for weeks came pouring out. It was the fear that had kept me silent, the fear that we were too different to ever make sense. Evelyn listened patiently, her expression never changing. When I was finished, she was silent for a long moment. Then she took my hand in both of hers. Maya, she said, her voice firm and clear. I am a CEO. I spend my days managing billion-dollar assets and navigating corporate politics that would make your head spin. I live in a world of calculation and strategy. Do you honestly think I don't know what I want? I shook my head, mute. When I'm with you, she continued, her voice softening, none of that matters. You're the first person in years who has seen me. Not my title, not my bank account, me. You talked to me about engines and stubborn soil. You built me a garden that felt like you understood my soul without me having to say a word. You don't just see the world, you feel it. You make things grow. That's not a novelty, Maya. That's essential. It's the one thing that's been missing from my life. Tears pricked my eyes. Everything she said resonated with a truth so profound, it undid me. She wasn't dismissing our differences. She was celebrating them, reframing them as the very reason we were drawn to each other. I'm not saying it will be easy, she said. People might look at us and make assumptions. My world can be judgmental, but I have never, ever made a decision in my life, personal or professional, based on what other people think. And I'm not about to start now. She squeezed my hand. The only thing that matters is what's in this room, what's between us. Okay, I whispered, a tear finally escaping and tracing a path down my cheek. She wiped it away with her thumb. Okay. The check I had insisted she write was still on her desk. It felt like an artifact from another lifetime. We had cleared the first hurdle, the most obvious and immediate one. We had named the power imbalance and chosen to step over it, together. It was a start, a real, solid start. We built our new reality in the days that followed, piece by piece. Our first official date was not at a fancy restaurant that she could easily afford, but at a cheap, delicious taco truck I loved, followed by a walk along the river. We held hands, and it felt like the most natural thing in the world. She came to my tiny, cluttered apartment and didn't bat an eye at the stacks of books on the floor or the perpetually half-finished engine parts on my coffee table. She just smiled, kissed me, and started making coffee as if she belonged there. I learned the small things about her: that she was a terrible cook but made the best coffee I'd ever had, that she loved old jazz records and would hum along, slightly off key, that she had a wicked, nerdy sense of humor that only came out when she felt completely comfortable, and I let her see the real me. The me who was still scared, who still had scars from Sarah, but who was willing to be brave for her. I let her see the me who could spend hours happily covered in grease, rebuilding a carburetor, and who could also be brought to tears by the beauty of a sunset. We were creating our own space, a world that was neither just hers nor just mine, but a new territory we were charting together. The garden I had built for her became our sanctuary. We spent evenings out there, sitting on the stone wall, glasses of wine in hand, watching the fireflies begin to dot the twilight. She'd point out the constellations, her knowledge of the stars as vast as her knowledge of market trends. I'd tell her the names of the night-blooming flowers I'd planted. It was in these quiet moments that I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that this was real. This was worth the risk. I had started the summer wanting nothing more than to be left alone, to hide from the world in the simple, honest work of tending to the earth. I had been tending to my own broken ground, trying to force something to grow in a place that felt barren. And then Evelyn had walked out in her storm-colored robe, and she had become my sun, my rain, the unexpected, beautiful, resilient bloom I never knew I was searching for. My world was no longer the size of a manicured lawn. It had expanded to hold the vast, incredible universe of her. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was finally, truly growing. Would you ever risk your heart on a love that seems to defy all logic? If you've ever had to choose between the safety of solitude and the terrifying, beautiful promise of connection, let me know in the comments below. And don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more stories.